You can be naked in podcast. Nobody has to see you.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Nina.
I'm Kenneth.
Kyle Perkins.
KD.
I'm Lanina.
And before we get started, I just want to remind our listeners that you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. And we are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And this episode is going to be a little bit different from any of the previous episodes we've done because we are not going to talk about one single topic. We are going to just kind of do a catch-all going over several different topics that I didn't feel like we had enough material to devote an entire episode to. So we're just going to go through as many of these as we can go through in the time that we have.
You could call it an extravaganza. Topic extravaganza.
I like to call it a Dicebag disco.
I like his.
Yeah, Dicebag Disco
Right.
is
Well,
my favorite.
So Dicebag Disco is going to be the title of this episode.
I beat you, Kyle.
So the first topic that I wanted to kind of go over is how to make it work when a character clearly does not fit with the rest of the group or with the game itself. How can either you make it work, or how do you have that conversation with the person who absolutely loves this character that is basically dragging the game down, either because their concept just doesn't fit, or maybe they're just annoying as hell and constantly in conflict with the other players or other characters at the table. I'll open it up. What do you guys think is the best way to handle a situation if the character just doesn't fit?
Kill him off, obviously.
We're talking about like a convenient accident in real life.
I like the...
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I like, and in a lot of ways, that's every character Kenneth's ever played in an RPG ever. And the way I've sort of found to deal with it is you just isolate that person completely and sort of really just hammer home that you need to change, not us.
Or
That's
you
a
can,
joke.
have a conversation with that person outside, and often or not, they realize that their character doesn't fit in, whether or not they love it. If it gets to cause party dilemmas, or if they're the paladin in the group of evil beings, it's just like, it's not going to work. You're going to lose every time, and eventually it won't be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And a tough part of that, too, is a lot of the times the reason why a character isn't working with the party is unfortunately something that the player really likes about the character.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's the fact that they're completely anti-authority, which, not the worst thing in the world, but in a game where you maybe have to, deal with some magistrates or something, that's going to prove to be a problem. And so that's unfortunately sort of where navigating it gets a little difficult, is you don't want to have this player lose out on some fun because they, and change a core aspect of the character. So maybe then in that case, you just need to try to have a conversation and sort of see if they'll even be willing to change other parts of the character to maybe tone down the anti-authoritarianism or authorityism. I don't know. It's a tough line to walk, unfortunately.
Or maybe talk with your GM and have, some sort of in-game reason why your character changes, like some event or traumatic thing or life-changing moment where your character's like, man, the authority sucks. Because I know we've done that before in a game where a character was very goody-two-shoes and very we can't go behind my captain's back, even if he might be evil. And we convince them to be like, well, let's wait and see if they are. We can work this out together. We won't completely trash your captain, but we won't exactly tell them what's going on every second of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I know I talked about it kind of last time. We talked about, I think it was the social contract we had, and I had a similar kind of scenario I painted with one of my players.
Whoa, you're an official guest star now, Kenny.
Oh, man.
You've guested twice.
This is awesome. Well, thank you for having me back.
Triple A was on one.
Mm.
So far winning.
You are winning.
Anyway. But I brought up one of my players, who will not be named. I'll call him Clarence. But Clarence just started out. This is his first D&D game. A lot of the people there, my whole philosophy of D&D is hey, I'm here to be a gateway DM. Here's how the game is played, what you can do, and just show them a good time. And the campaign's going for a year now, so I've had to deal with, I've had multiple people kind of tell me he's definitely the outlier in the respect that he just does his own thing, always finds a way to loop back to the party, but really does separate himself, so it's the group and him. So I almost have to do 2 sessions where he's doing his own thing. because I was too accommodating, like, hey, it's your first time, let me be nice, but the way I've had to rein that in, especially being a DM, it's hard, because I still want him to have fun. Now he expects it of me, because I was too nice and gave him too much in the beginning. So now...
Give a mouse a cookie.
That's what I'm saying. And I've had to be a little more punishing with his decisions. Like, as he's gotten used to the game, I kind of treat him like a more seasoned player, and that's how I've done it. Like, okay, now you're gonna know some consequences to your actions, because at first, I was showing you the game, but now you're playing the game. And it's a hard balance to kind of hit, especially being a game master.
So would you say you would advocate being a bit harsher on that player in the start so it doesn't turn into something like what you had to deal with?
Actually, funny you say that. I just started a new game where he's in it, and I have done that. I'm harsher because he's immediately trying to do a lot of what he did in the old game, and I was harsher, and he respects it, though. Like, I made sure I talked to him, and he's like, yeah, and he's taken a lot more like a seasoned player, so he's like, okay, now I'm going to actually think about mechanics-wise what I can do with other players, what I can do. Now he's more of a team player, still doing his own thing, but much more constrained. Not in like a bad way, but more in like, I'm not going to jump off the vessel, I don't know, fight a sun, because that's kind of stuff he'd try to do back in the other game. So, in reason.
If you would have been this harsh on him for his first game, do you think he would have had as much fun? Do you think he would have quit?
See, that's a good question. I thought about that. Honestly, I feel like he'd still not have as much fun because a lot of his crazy stories, and honestly, they turned out to be really fun for some of the party, not all of it, and that's where kind of the split happened. So the game would be a different tone because some of the crazy things he did change the story a bit, which for me was kind of cool as a storytelling aspect, but I feel like it still would have had the same level of excitement, just he would have learned earlier, right, that maybe it's not okay to go off and do that, or do things more in the game's, like, actual rule base. So going forward, I'm probably going to be a little more, at least in the beginning, like, hey, these are the rules, let's stick in these, and then branch out from there just so people don't go crazy and wild. In the end, I'm still happy with how everything turned out. I'm just trying to be more careful going on.
Yeah, I've definitely made what I now view as a mistake with a new player to the game and them wanting to do things and ended up, you're wanting to go off again, go off apart from the party and do this special thing. Like if you were a rogue or something. And doing it once or twice to just kind of encourage their role playing. But there does reach a point where you are no longer encouraging participating in the game,
like cooperative.
And you are encouraging the isolation of that character from the group. And I very early in my career, I did do that with a particular player, and it became such a habit that I was not able to then break it. The player then, when he was with the group, he had the more forceful personality at the table. So after he was comfortable with the game and driving his own character through his own story, taking, like, in the past, going off on his own, when he was in with the big group, it became him imposing his will upon the rest of the players of the group. It just drugged the game down at that point. And it was what he expected from the game at that point, partially because that was what I had encouraged. And it was really tough just kind of breaking that cycle, because he had it in his head that all of these ideas I'm having are great for the story, even though they were isolating different people from the group.
I wonder if it breeds sort of this idea of I don't need the party to do things. I've definitely I haven't been that player, but I've been in games where a player is so frustrated by, like, lack of decision making, or, like, oh, you're spending too much time debating. I know I can do this better by myself.
You said other player or
another player?
Oh, wasn't you?
That was not me.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then they'll just break off by themselves, and the GM allows it. But then, again, like you said, Clayton, you then sort of, that player, especially if they're new, develops this idea of, well, I don't need other people. Like, I can just do most of the things on my own, and it's quicker and it's more efficient, and I don't have to, deal with that whole concept of people having differing opinions. I don't know. I feel like maybe Kenny's onto something, and you do need to, like, have a firm hand, even if they're a first-time player.
In the beginning, I'd say. Like, it's player to player. Like, obviously it's not the same for everyone. Like, my other two friends, I had three that were all new. They just stayed within the rules. I kept, like, I was playing 3-5, and I just said, hey, do everything you want. And one friend who really loves just kind of like the crunchiness in the system really went in and made a pretty intense character now. He played one of the strongest clerics I've ever seen because he just latched onto it, but he stayed within the rules. And that's fair. Like, everything he picked was what I said he could do. My other friend who's kind of shy, I know we kind of talked about this. or you guys mentioned an older podcast, like, that was a whole different challenge, but he stayed within the rules, had fun. So it was just that one, is his personality out of the game, actually. And that's why, for him specifically and other players that are stronger personality-wise, I have to sit down saying, this is a role-playing game, and I'm really glad you have a good, speech and good voice for this, but, I want to make sure it's fun for everyone. It's not just for you. Because there's other mediums if you want to do this by yourself, but if we're doing it in a collaborative group, I want to make sure everyone has a chance.
To think as kind of the line of when you've done enough encouraging, they've gotten a good grasp of playing the game and understanding that how they play the game, and now it's time to kind of pull it back into the party, is once they start to do it themselves. It's okay whenever they're trying to figure, when they're still new, they're so new that they're like, I don't know what I can do here. And you ask them, well, just think out loud for a little bit and tell me what you're thinking of what you can do. And then I provide encouragement of possibilities from there. Once it's to the point where that player is no longer asking for the advice on what to do, they're making the decisions then and there. I think that's the perfect point to start putting out options of, well, you've got 3 or 4 other players around the table. Is there any way you can do that, including them in it? And growing it at that point to make sure that the solutions to the problems that are presented aren't just things that player can do, and really tailor encounters to the things that the other players at the table can do.
I think that's a really good way to go about it. What if they refuse to either change or rearrange their character or even try to work with the party? What if they're very stubborn? What do you do then?
Well, you talk with them about it, and you have to lay it out and say, especially if it's the game master who's seeing this and it's dragging down their fun, I feel like the game master has just as much right to say, hey, this isn't working as anybody else at the table, and let them know that this isn't the direction that this game is going to go in. If I'm a game master, I'm not having fun. If I'm a player, say, I'm really not enjoying this. But that takes a lot of courage, especially when you're new to the game. If the entire group is new to the game, which is the experience I was doing with the player I was describing earlier, I handled it wrong. But since then, I've tried to make it clear to the player that come to the player and say, this is what I see your character as, and here are some ideas of how I can really work with your character if this one little thing was a little bit different. Some players just won't respond to it, but most people are accommodating enough to realize that if the fun is being impacted, if the other people at the table aren't having as much fun, most people are going to be able to adjust a little bit. And I say most people, and the particular player that I'm talking about was not one of those. And it did get to the point where he was asked to no longer come back because he was just absolutely dominating the game. All of his decisions were the only decisions that he would listen to, the only things that he would do. And he was doing he played a chaotic evil character every single time in a D&D game.
Yeah, the person in my game is playing chaotic evil. And I know exactly what you mean. He kind of stamps other people's, like, I wouldn't say he's like actively trying to take out their opinions or trying to take out their decisions. It's just his is the one they're going to do. And if not somebody else's, like I know a few people in my game have said their voice, they feel like they can't be heard just because theirs is so like omnipresent. They're just like, yeah, if I say anything, they'll just kind of quiet me down. So, I mean, I can definitely sympathize with that. And it's gotten better now, but I've had games in the past where, yeah, we've had that person who won't like listen to reason and is just doing their own game. So it's a hard balance. Like, that's what I found, especially being a GM. Like, back when I was a player, it was hard enough because it felt awkward bringing it up to the rest of the group. Like, we're all thinking it, but you're like, who's going to say it? Or if as a GM, you're like, okay, now I have to be, in some cases, you feel like a jerk. Like, hey, I may have to kick you out of my game, but you realize you're being the worst. So it's not easy.
And a lot of times it really is the game master's responsibility. If the players aren't having fun, the game master should keep an eye on the other players at the table. If one of the other players at the table comes to the game master to address this issue, that means that more than one player at the table is having that same issue, because it does take a lot of courage to come up and say, I have a problem with this. And ultimately it falls to the game master because they are the one running the game. They are keeping the game running.
All right.
Yeah,
Do you want to
right.
transition to that topic? Because that was pretty good.
That was good.
So now we'll transition. Actually, that was a little bit of a segue into the next topic of how much responsibility does the game master have to ensure that each player is around the table is engaged, is having fun with game.
That's one I definitely kind of diving into, like we just said, with my new players. I'll just use that example again because they're great. I love them all. But in the beginning, it was a lot heavier in my favor where, like, I'm trying to make sure they have fun because I'm teaching them a system, trying to engage them, and like you were saying earlier, show them what can you do in this scenario, what abilities, what are skills, what's an attribute. Like, they had all these questions, and I have to facilitate that and make sure it doesn't bog down their fun while still showing them that D&D is a great system, or like any tabletop can be super cool because you can do whatever you want. And in the beginning, I definitely say, like, I can't give it like a good proportion, but maybe like 80% of it was me driving them the first 2 sessions, but it slowly ebbs as they became more and more seasoned. And later on, I'd say once I have a group of players who've played for years, I'd almost say, like, maybe it's not quite 50-50, but it's a two-way split where the players have to have really engaging good characters they really love to be, because that shows that they're having fun with the group, and then the DM has to give that good story for them to interact with, a world they can feel like they live in. So it's a two-way street for me, and when I have players who know what they're doing, I try to go at least for 50-50, because I need a response for me to give them something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the ideal, I think you're kind of on something there. I think the ideal eventually is, the players will like write stuff into their backstories that they want you to like incorporate, and then, they leave it up to you how to like, interpret and incorporate it, but like they're like, hey, I want my character to have like a rivalship with this guy, and that's going to impact the story somehow, but it's up to you how to interpret that. And I think that's ultimately the ideal for eventually, like, how to engage players sufficiently. So it is 50-50 between the player and the GM. Like you also said, though, Kenny, I think that having first-time players, as the GM, you have to take on more of that responsibility because they don't know, like, cooperative storytelling is a hard concept to kind of wrap your head around initially, I think. And so the idea that, I can approach my GM and say, hello, this is something I would like maybe for my character to have. And ideally, if your GM's not an asshole, they're not going to be like, well, this is my game. I don't want to do that or something. So I think that for that first time, you kind of have to guide them a little bit and be like, hey, you're at a bar. There's someone there. What do you do? What do you do? You recognize them from your hometown, And maybe they're like, wow, I fucking hate that guy. I'm going to go up and hit him,
You're like, all right, roll initiative. They're like, what's that?
Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, well, now we tell you about mechanics.
I mean, I do think it's two different questions versus of engaged versus fun, because I think it's really up to the players to be interested and engaged, like interested in the idea of playing a D&D game and wanting to play the game. And once you get people that are interested in playing and want to play the game, it's up to the DM to create a fun story so that people can have an interesting experience. But I do think it's up to the players to be engaged with the game and not like flippant or bored or annoyed.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh, okay.
No, do you not want to have a question asked?
No, go for it.
Okay. So let's assume you're in a game in which it's like a 100% dungeon crawl. Right? Like, no roleplay, really, just dungeon crawling.
Oh, jeez.
Maybe there's some looting mechanics, and, like, there's a chance to, like, the most roleplay you have is every once in a while your face character can roll, like, a diplomacy check to, like, convince an enemy to, like, stand down.
Well, that game's not for you.
Hold on. Okay, jumping the gun here. Now, in that case, is it up to the players to, like, make their own fun? Or is that a case where you kind of look to the GM and say, hey, this isn't really working for us?
I think that's when you look to the GM and be like, hey, nobody's really having fun. This is, like, a crunch, and we want to roleplay instead of just do mechanics. Like, I think that is up to the DM.
Now, there are players that just enjoy...
Yeah, no, like, if they're having fun.
But, like, in this case, assuming it's, like, a group that likes a balance.
Now, here's a question, and you're hypothetical. By the way, listeners, I'm real sick, so I have to limit what I say. Which may be a good thing.
It's like a word limit.
Yeah.
Aww.
I disagree.
Are the players trying? Like, imagine there's a group of 4, and the DM's only throwing dungeon crawls at them. Do the players actually try to banter and get in character, and then have that stifled by the DM being like,
okay, people, there's a kobold, and he needs to be dealt with. He's looking at you. He's got a spear.
like interrupting their role play.
I don't know if I would necessarily go that far. I would say maybe there's some cases of like the game master being like, all right, now we gotta move on to the next room or something, but not necessarily like, the kobold stabs you while you're talking to your friend. You take damage.
Yeah, no, this might be like a fluffy, feel-good way to address the question, but I think if the DM is doing what you just said, the party is having a blast and role-playing, and then the kobold sneaks up behind you and spears you in your hamstring. That's annoying. That's really annoying. Like, no, that would be zero fun. And that might be a situation where literally if that happens to you, the group could look around and just be like, all right, out of character. Listen, Francis, like, this isn't
Francis.
fun. But if the players are able to take a little bit of action and kind of bring their own fun into it without having to, like, sit down and be like, this isn't working. I don't know. Again, maybe it's a feel-good thing to just say, feel out your situation. But I think that both approaches could fly.
I think that's what I was trying to say. Like, if the characters are, if the players are trying to have fun and they're still not having fun, that's when it's up to the DM to change something.
Mm.
I feel like in each situation, it's very much like a friendship or relationship with the GM-player ratio. Sometimes the GM will have to put in more, and sometimes the player will have to put in more. It'll vary from game to game, depending on if we completely diverge the GM's path, and they don't have the ability to keep up all of that fun, and so it's up to us.
I have no problem keeping up my fun. There it is!
Wait.
I'm back, baby!
No, well, you
Sure.
said you had to limit what you say. Sorry.
All right,
Sorry,
so
that's your workout for
to
today.
the listeners, he just delivered that line and then like had to stifle a cough. But he's doing it.
But he had commitment, and I was next to him, and I felt that
there
energy.
was conviction in that statement. So he's back.
See, that's like an interesting concept, though. Kind of going back to what we were saying. I like that. It's like a weird idea. Now, hear me out, guys. Like, this is like obviously a controlled environment, like we're saying, very hypothetical, but I can see both having a very interesting outcome. Like, two ways to start a game. Let's say with fresh players. Like, it's like Billy, Jill, and Kobold are in a game together, and they're like, yeah, let's have a D&D. And you're like, okay, so...
And like Kobold's parents are really into D&D, and
Yeah,
he's
no.
only like recently getting into it.
He's not a huge fan, but he's here to
His
help.
parents named him fucking Kobold.
Yeah, and he's actually a human. But Kobold's there, really hating his time. But you have to make sure he's engaged, right? And the other people. So, like, the way I usually do it, like I said, is I like showing a very open world, saying, like, you have a lot of options, roll anything you want, explain to me why I think that would work, and try to engage the player by saying, let's roleplay first, get combat second, because that's usually how you want to do it. Like, feel your characters, feel the world, feel real, and, like, really get into it. But there's the flip side, where you have a hardcore dungeon crawl. Like, the DM's like, here we are in the dungeon, classic D&D, and then this is just 100%, like, they're putting on the players to see if they start role-playing themselves, acting it out in this more or less confined space. When the DM's like, you have a safe place to do what you want, but I'm just gonna give you a story, and you guys just do you. Like, not facilitate, just say, hey, he'd explain the mechanics beforehand, explain how it works, just see if the players naturally make this thing themselves at the DM churning the pot kind of thing.
I was in a 5th edition game a couple years ago in which we were all... It was sort of that scenario I described where it was a hardcore dungeon crawl, where we weren't in a physical dungeon, but it was like, you go to one location, you grind, you go to the next location,
it's like a combat
you
slog?
grind. It's a combat slog. It was just combat. None of the NPCs really wanted to talk to any of the party.
See, that's rough, though.
And so, like, in that scenario, like, me and the other PCs ended up trying to, like I was asking Nina, like, make our own fun, where we would just try to, like, see what goofy things we could do with our abilities, or, like, trying to talk to each other a little bit. And so we had to make our own fun, and I felt like in that particular scenario, the GM should have tried to do, like, to read the room a little bit better and done a little bit more to try to engage the party. Because I think I've talked about this game on this podcast before. I'm like, that was a game where I was a Storm Cleric, and I was like, every turn, just like, all right, I roll cast lightning. My turn again. Cast lightning.
Ready, guys? Lightning.
Lightning. Like, and that's very repetitive, right? That's not very fun. So, I think in that case, the GM needs to, like, read the room and say, okay, maybe I need to change up what I'm doing, rather than just being like, I have this very, like, thin storyline that you're gonna go to these places and you're gonna fight these things, and that's gonna be the game.
Yeah. That's one of those things, like I said, there's a way both could work, but it just depends on the players. And like you said, it boils down to, are people like on their phones and not engaged, then you need to change your story. Like that is on the GM if the players are just, if they're trying their best and you're not giving it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, like, if if the inverse of that is, players are on their phones and you're trying, then that's
a whole different story.
Yeah, what do you do if sitting around the table, the two players who are physically closest to the game master are actually engaged in a scene, and then the players who are sitting the furthest are at the end of the game, they say they enjoyed it, they had a lot of fun, but during the game, it's clear that they are not engaging in the game.
I think next game, switch up seating on purpose. See if that works.
Well, that's an interesting idea.
I was going to say that the seating might need to be rearranged there.
Yeah.
I also know that it's harder with bigger groups to keep everybody engaged all of the time. Also, that longer games tend to take a lot of attention, and keeping attention for like a solid 4 or 5 hours is very hard, even if it is fun and engaging. It is very hard to concentrate on one thing at a time, especially if you're waiting for your turn and it's 6 people ahead.
I'm usually willing to cut some slack if those people that are in the back are on their phones, but like as long as they're like showing investment and like engaging when it's like group activity and stuff focused on them, I'm willing to cut them some slack. Cause like, if it's like a party of 8 or 9 people, it's a little hard to be like invested in every single person's storyline and then, really just be like, oh man, what's Thurgood doing today? Oh, he's out in the woods. I love druids.
Also, it's 2017. Like, until the firing sequence is finally initiated, we're going to be glued to our phones, Once the firing sequence is initiated, well, we all know what's going to happen with the
We're all
highlight.
going to be glued.
That's why I burned my phone.
Also, as long as they're not distracting anybody else. Like if
like don't be playing music on your phone or something.
Yeah, showing like memes to anybody, man.
Yeah, you've never done that ever, right?
Never
Unless it is specific to the
Memes.
situation. Unless it is specific to the situation, you're just like, yes, this music would fit perfectly. Or, this is your character right now, at this very moment.
Even that would piss me off.
Even if it was just music.
If I were a GM and there was a player who just started playing music on their phone,
Well,
of
if they
any
had
sort,
mentioned, I have a song that is perfect for this
oh,
specific
okay,
thing.
I see what. Yeah,
Like, not just be like, this is the song that is playing.
yeah, like given
Ask
the right
permission first.
given the right group in the right situation, like if I mean, I'm not saying I'm that grumpy. Like I could be okay with it, but if like I'm imagining a group of people I don't know that well when I was thinking about that,
Okay.
and if someone was just like, we're in the middle of something and they're just like, oh my god, this is your character right now, and just like hold their phone up to the table, and I'm just like, okay.
So that's when you smack the phone out of their hands.
And yell, firing sequence activated.
Well, fucking, I forget which director now. There's that famous story about the director who, would, nail gun, the crew's cell phones to, like, the backside of, the set, where it couldn't be seen if a phone went off. Oh my god.
Oh my god.
I heard that story too. I don't remember who it was.
I want to say John Carpenter, but that's
like,
wrong.
like fully nailed
Joe
them?
Carpenter.
I mean,
Like,
Carpenter using a nail gun.
Wait,
though.
Cameron, James Cameron.
Wait,
It was
James Cameron?
Serious?
Are you nail gun cell phones?
I'm
So hold on,
71% sure that it was James Cameron.
All right, I'm gonna.
So during Aliens, you just find that huge box cell phone. He's like, let me see that. And he just like nail guns it to the wall. That's amazing.
horrible.
I kind of love it.
No, that's
honestly.
actually-
I think
that's
it's really
pretty
funny.
If it was my phone, I would have probably just nail gunned his hand to the wall.
The worst part is, like, imagine he pins your phone and another one rings near the pocket. You're like, I'll take that.
Alright, that's a pretty good comedy sketch there. Then, like, he takes that one and then your beeper goes off.
And then it nail guns,
James
nail
Cameron,
guns it to your head.
I once nail gunned 20 mobiles to a wall.
Whoa! What an angel!
What a man!
This article says Avatar creator James Cameron shoots from the hip.
Oh my god, that makes it even better. That means the person is holding their phone up to their face, answering it, and he's just like, quick draw, boom! And just like the nail gun like shoots the phone against the wall from 20 paces.
Just deadpan.
That's
awesome. Haven't missed a shot yet. Walks away.
A great shot.
Anyway.
Wow. I was gonna say though, that's amazing, but I have to make sure. Hold on. I remember what we were saying because I had a point, and it was poor James Cameron's amazing. Oh, people on phones, right? So that it's pretty common in my game, like where people will be on phones. But like you said, bigger parties, they're engaging themselves, and still when I call on them, they'll like be like, oh yeah, but that's how I usually re-engage someone, or especially with new players, like, if I feel like they're like, don't know what to do, or like on their phone, like, oh, it's never my turn, or I feel like I can't get my voice out because, Clarence over there is like punching a wall and everyone's looking at him because it's funny. I'll like point over and be like, hey, well, what do you think? And I'll name that person and point at them. They'll look up from their phone wherever they're doing and be like, oh, my character does this. So I can tell they still want to be part of the story. They just need that hook again. And that's where it goes, at least in my games, back to the GM, where they're like, I don't feel like I can really come back in until I need, because every time they try, they get pushed back or feel like they can't. So that's when I'm like, take this line and pull them back in the story. And I only do that when I see that they've been quiet for like maybe like 15 minutes, because sometimes you can't avoid two players talking and somebody else, they're in the other room. Yeah. And people know that. But afterwards, I'm like, okay, what's everyone else doing? Like, I always make sure immediately after this, I'll like, and if something's going on too long, I'll pause it dramatically. Like, a conversation's gone like 5 minutes real time, which it's fine. But if nobody else is engaged and they say something dramatic, I'll be like, all right, and pause. Let's see what everyone else is doing. So I can make sure we keep the room going and segment. And that usually works well for my players, because one of my games now has like 8 players and there's really no other way I can do it. So, I just have to do it in segments unless they're all together. Mm-hmm. It's hard though. Like, it's a balance. And if the players, as long as they're okay with it and they told me it's fine, that's why we do it. If not, I have to, try something else.
Something that was hit on quite a ways back in this conversation is just a point that I want to hit home, or my opinion that I want to hit home about a particular point. Starting a game in a tavern for new players is a terrible idea. Because you've got a group of players who are new to the game. They're not used to role playing. They don't know what they can do. And you're like, okay, you're sitting at a table. What are you doing? Crickets. Those ways of starting a campaign, I feel like that only works with a group of players who are, one, have some experience behind them, and they are the types of players who, like pretty much everybody at this group, if you give them a character, they are going to run as far and as fast with that character as the game master will let them, away from whatever story the game master wants. So that type of opening is great for those types of players who have a lot of initiative, but throwing it in for a brand new group of players, I've tried it before, and every single time it just falls flat. It falls flat until some NPC starts a fight or a group of orcs bursts in with torches and set fire to the bar.
Yeah, sometimes you need a strong enough story hook, and that's why my last game I started them in the location, more or less the castle where they're getting their mission. So they had that moment where they all get out of the ships, talk to one another, and then immediately usher them to the story. So they make sure they're invested in this, like, the actual, like, thing I'm trying to weave first, and then they can start doing their own, like, interaction while they're flying out and about the galaxy. Mm-hmm. Again, I agree with you, like, starting out the tavern, like, classic D&D, I did it my first time I ever played, because they're like, yeah, it's like, one of the tropes, but it's fun. But with that, I try to make sure they all meet each other, have a chance to talk, get a feel for the group, and then pull them right into the story, so at least they know, hey, we do have this quest, but after we have this first initial plot hook, we can start doing our own thing. Mm-hmm.
What I like to do is not necessarily start out in media res, but like a group of D&D characters, they have already been brought together, but they're getting ready to talk to somebody important. An analogy would be like in the movie The Usual Suspects, where all of the people are brought together and they're in the lineup. That's kind of where I would like to start a game. They're already together. They have a reason for being together. Maybe they don't know what the reason is, but something important is just about to happen, but they've got the latitude to be in their characters, kind of get into their characters' heads before the plot begins to move.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because that's what we did. We're doing a Star Wars game, and that's exactly what I did. I brought them into Vader's castle. They're about to be Vader, and that's all they knew. So talking about, like, with Darth Vader then, like, you were touching on how with your players you like to put them in the situation, in that line of, like, be, like, at the precinct, whatever it might be. And that's how I tried to do my last game, or just started it, and players, like, it had pretty resounding success. They really enjoyed it. Like I said, it's a Star Wars game. And, they went to Vader's castle, and I was like, alright, your mission is here for Vader. A few people actually played that roleplay beforehand just to show why they're there. But everyone else, I said, fit in your backstory. You're here by your own volition. Or if he forced you, that's up to you. But you are all here for one reason. And I gave them about 10 minutes to roleplay when they all landed in, like, the docking bay, more or less. And that was their chance to show their characters and how, like, either are they going to be reserved, study the other people around them. One of the players offered tea to everybody because he's a protocol droid. Like, it's just just how they played it, and then they went up to the main plot, like I said. So I gave them a moment to meet each other, see their team and who they're going to be with for the next however long we run this game, and then brought in a good old meaty plot hook, and then sent them out to the galaxy. Mm-hmm. Which, they liked, but there's dozens of ways you can start a game. So that's almost a question in itself. Like, what would you say is one of your favorite ways a game's been started for you, that you started a game? Like, what really gets you into a game?
My favorite opening for a game that I've ever run was for it wasn't exactly an evil campaign. It was a campaign where, quote, there is no presupposition of being of a particular alignment, which translates to an evil campaign. And all of the player characters started out with amnesia. I started them out having just drank water from the river Styx, which in D&D causes you to lose your memory. So it was right then and there. They have no memories at this point. They're basically standing in front of this massive demon that's like 50 feet tall. And he just says, go forth and do my bidding, and then just shoves them all through a portal. And they wake up, they're in the middle of a dungeon. They don't know what the hell is going on. They have a couple of minutes to figure out what they're going to do. They have a couple of minutes just to see who else is in the party, because they have no idea who they are. They have no idea what they look like. They're just looking around, and every single one of them was a monstrous player character. So I give them 60 seconds to start to ask what the hell's going on before a band of good adventurers burst in, see this group of monsters sitting around conferring about something, and start to try to do what a bunch of good adventurers do and just start wailing on them. No explanation needed, because they're evil, monstrous races. That was probably my funnest opening for a campaign I've ever done.
That's super cool.
Is this favorite we've played in, or run, or both?
I was saying either or. I'd say definitely my favorite running so far has been that Star Wars one I did. But like you can do if you GM'd or...
There was a Star Wars game that Lanina and I were in that opened very, very standardly with a bar fight. But despite the standard opening, I think what sold it was the GM was a huge Star Wars nerd and just encapsulated the moment and the tone and the mood of the fight in the bar absolutely perfectly for a Star Wars game.
So you are saying that this game master was a huge Star Wars nerd? That's saying something.
Yeah, coming from me.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He really just nailed it with the music and sort of what was going on and the way the fight went and the tone of it, and there was a chase that followed. And all of our characters were all there, I think, on the same assignment, right? We didn't know that we were. Yeah. Because we were all working for different factions. I was working for the Empire. Lanina's character was working for the Jedi.
It was stealthy.
And
not very stealthy, but stealthy.
Third player was a bounty hunter.
Yeah.
And we were all there to protect this senator, but we were all working for different factions. And so this fight breaks out because this third party tries to kidnap her. And so, I got my lightsaber out, and I'm, swinging at people, and she's got her lightsaber out, and I'm I don't know who you are.
I don't know who you are.
And then we're we gotta get the senator, though, and then the bounty hunter's over there, everything is awful. But I guess I'll use my flamethrower. And so, it was just very, well done. And it was my favorite opening for a game, I think, because of all that, and also just that, we didn't need a reason to all need to work together immediately. We all had it. But there was also this, veneer of you're still doing your own things, if that makes sense. Because we were all working for different factions, we may have had the same goal, but we still felt like our characters were there on their own personal thing.
And that's important. Yeah, I was going to say, with the whole idea of staying the standard bar scene, if the GM does it well in that case, it can be, really fun. I was just, you saying that, reminded me. The longest game I've ever been part of was one of our friends here ran one for about almost 3 years. It was at least 2 years I was in it. And it opened up just a bar, but all of us were seasoned players. He picked people who played D&D before on purpose. So we were able to really do our own thing. And from just going to the bar to me translating for my friends who's trying to hit on somebody that was attractive to, I went upstairs to see my friends because they wanted food. Again, he just said, you guys have fun, do you? And this is again over the course of an hour. But my first, and he pointed out, my only crit for I think a year was the first session, because my backstory had written something with demons. They corrupted my family, and I was there to smite. I was a cleric, so I was there to kill all demons, but outside that, really cool guy. So I went upstairs, and my friend was actually a shadow mage. So he's in the corner just messing with shadows, and hides our Neanderthal friend, who is playing a Neanderthal in the corner. And I come in there, and my friend who's behind me walks up and goes, he knows my backstory because we just talked about it downstairs, like just established between characters. And he gets this smile and goes, "Hey, Carl," that was my character's name. He's like, "I think there's a demon over there." And I looked over and before I could say anything, like, "Yeah, right." And GM's like, "Hey, could you roll for that real quick? Like, roll a will save or something?" And I bomb it. And I was like, the GM has like screamed and throw a chair at it and get a crit. And even GM goes, "Oh!" And like the player's like, "Are you gonna kill me?" And I was like, luckily it's the cleric hurting you. So I beam him in the head. And like, he's in the shadow pod. He was doing it because I don't pretend to understand why he was doing it. But I just hear this scream and I was like, and he comes out just going, sorry, I'm making a face, but he's like really angry and slowly comes out, blood just covering his face. And I just go up there and I had like a basic healing spell, just wipe it across his head and say, "Sorry, pal." Like, at this point, and then he just smiles and slowly goes back into the shadow pod. And like the shadow mage is going like, "What happened, guys?" Like, it was, again, like we made it our own, and that's how you can make it fun. But that does, like, we had played years beforehand, so it's a balance.
Actually, I did finally realize it's actually one of my favorite openings to a game. It was more of a prologue than anything else. We played the characters that we were going to play, but as younger versions of them. In the start of the campaign, none of us had ever met, and so the way that the GM decided to have us do it is to each and every one of us have our own, like, entrance into this town. I ran into somebody who basically told me a future of my own, and it freaked me out, and then we fought people, and that's what, like, combined us together, because it would eventually end up to be our rivals. And we're just like, oh yeah,
like, they were our rivals later on in the story.
And they showed up and were like, "We're better than you," and I'm like, "No, you're not," and just punched them a lot, and
Yes, you do. That's a good response.
made good friends, and it was just a lot of fun because we all had our own, like, little ways of, like, coming into our character. They were new characters, but we got to play them as kids, and that, like, gave us the chance to make weird mistakes that you wouldn't make as, like, a seasoned adult in the world, and it just helped us get into our characters. I felt a lot better than just walking into a tavern or walking into the guild and being all like, "Yep, this is who I am. Hello."
That's actually like the best way I've ever heard of like starting a backstory too, because usually people do out of character, like, "Hey, we're going to roleplay each person separately," which can take a lot of time, and that engages everyone. Like, that's a really good idea.
And it gave us at least half of, because I know a few of the characters weren't actually in it at that time, but it gave us a connection as youthful friends as well. So we had like a very good bond going, a very good trust, a reason to be together later on for the campaign as well.
I think my favorite opening was in a one-shot that I ran, where we were all looking to hang out and do something for an evening. There were some friends, I pat Kenny on the back, visiting from out of town, and we all went around and said an element we'd like to see in the game world, and then I just like synthesized them as best I could and spat the players into this world, and I forget all the elements now, but
Where they're talking animals that were cool.
But there were talking animals in this one. Right?
There were talking animals, but they weren't cool.
They weren't
talking
cool.
animals that are cool is one way to say an element for a game. A better way would be to say everyone has a familiar assigned at birth.
Yep, it was a duck.
That
for
was
us,
the
at
one.
least.
Well, yeah.
So, anyway, in this game, which had a lot of different elements, one of them was that there is a massive Halloween party that's like city-wide. And all the players are at a Halloween party, and I get the wacky idea to have everyone except the party, except the player characters, but everyone else at this party, they turn into, for real, what their costume is.
Oh.
And it was a blasty blast. Everyone seemed to have a great time. It was just a wacky one-shot, but a lot of people, seemed to enjoy it. No one had a big, deep backstory planned, but having everyone get to interact with these, just an innumerable amount of archetypes and stereotypes forged from Halloween costumes. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was a good time.
Yeah, the kiss check was still my favorite part about
The what?
when you're trying to distract Jason.
Oh, my favorite was when you turned into a car.
Jason Voorhees.
There's a lot. That's a fun game. I really like that.
Kind of built into particularly Vampire, but most of the World of Darkness games, kind of the first session is how you came to be, or how you came to be, or how you became aware of the fact that you are not a regular person. In Vampire, it's the story of how you became embraced. And Werewolf, it's the story of how you discover how you first changed. I feel like those, while it's built into that system, I've seen it done. I've seen that same way carried over into other systems where playing out basically the most significant event in your life up until that point is a great way to just kind of be presented with something that is often traumatic for your character, and being able to, you already have your backstory, but then you have this life-changing event happen at the very onset of the campaign. And from the get-go, you have the ability to see how that change in your character progresses forward, because maybe something happens that nobody planned for, and so you're suddenly grappling with something that you had no idea that you were going to be grappling with, and you're grappling with it from the get-go.
That's something I do like about certain systems like that build the backstory for you. Like, not as, like, in-depth, which that's amazing. I've actually never played World of Darkness. That's super cool. Edge of the Empire tries to do that, the system I've been running for Star Wars, where a really big part of the game is like your drivers and what go against you, so kind of like positives and negatives for your characters. It's supposed to be roleplay things, obviously, that you put in your backstory, but they actually play into game mechanics. Like, for instance, one of your motivations can be like, man, that Empire is pretty bad, so anytime you run to an Empire, like say you run to an agent, you run to a group of stormtroopers, and you're confident enough, you may get a bonus to ambushing because you've trained your whole life to fight them, versus, a negative is, I'm terrified of the Empire, reverse of that.
Now,
so
that's not the D20 system, that's the new one, right?
the Edge of the Empire is a really unique system. Yeah, I bought all the dice for it. It's actually, I like it better than the D20 system because it is more based around roleplay. Like, it has mechanics built into your character's sheet for roleplaying, which I thought was neat for especially some of my newer players who wanted that extra help. It actually is really cool.
That's good.
One other way I have started a campaign that went over incredibly well was all of the players were sitting in a lobby and they were waiting their turn to go in and get their fortunes told with tarot cards. It gives the players to kind of sit and interact, and it also has each player going in, and at this point I had very little plan for the campaign, so I was literally revealing tarot cards, explaining in vague details where this campaign was going to go from there on out.
That's super cool.
So we've kind of talked about a lot of getting new players into the game, getting a campaign started, and you've talked about running Edge of the Empire, which isn't really that old of a system. I want to kind of talk now about, like, how do you let your players know what you can do in a system that is brand new, either to them or just a brand new system that has just been published? Because that's what I've seen that's a big barrier for even experienced players, is just knowing what you can do.
Using, like you said, Edge of the Empire, like, the first time I played it was only like 4 years ago, because again, it's new. And usually the way I run systems is I always try to do ones I play before, so at least have a vague understanding, but in this case, it had been 4 years. It is such a unique system, I forgot everything. So, the way it worked out was one of my players, the one I told you before, the guy's really like just the crunchy parts of the system. He read a lot of it, so he kind of covered character gen while I read game mechanics. So we kind of covered both parts, saying like, hey, we're both going to teach you this game. I'll be running it, but he'll be helping you gen your characters. And while he was doing that, I kind of got a grasp of it. So afterwards, I had to explain to everybody, this is what the game lets us do, and this is what, as a GM, they know, like, playing with me before, what I let them do, which is usually the play it cool role. Like, if you describe something fantastic to me, even if it's outside of reason, I'll give you a chance. But that's something I usually set beforehand, saying, like, I'm a lot more lenient of a DM, but there are rules that we're going to stay within the system. Like, that player I mentioned before who usually does his own things, this time I was a little harsher, saying, like, hey, this is a little more punishing of a system. It's more of an Edge of the Empire. You're supposed to feel just like you're outside of a great power source, the Empire itself, so you can die very easily. So I'm like, you can be offed pretty quickly, your character can be incapacitated, so your actions have a lot harsher consequences than D&D, which can be a little more forgiving, which is kind of funny to say, but this is supposed to be more lethal of a system, and that's something I established beforehand. So I try to give them as honest as a portrayal of what the system is before we get in, so no one's caught off guard.
Mm-hmm. But how about, like, the actual nitty-gritty of how things are done in the system and what options are available, like, in combat or in a conversation? Because I've run into it every time I introduce a new game system. I've tried having a printout of, like, most commonly done rolls, most commonly done maneuvers or tricks or whatever your system may call it. And players look at it for the first session and they might try to do some things that are outside of just I swing my sword and do I hit? How much damage do I do? But I feel like it's always about session 3 or 4 that really combats do devolve back into I roll, I hit. Do I take it out? No. Okay. How do you keep it fresh and how do you let the players know what they can do and remind them of what they can do?
I think that with if you're going at this from an experienced group that's playing a new system that none of them have played before, because you bring up a fair point too, in that it probably will devolve back into eventually, I swing, do I hit? No. Okay, what do I do now? To ease them in, to both combat mechanics and like skill mechanics and whatever else there might be, maybe having a low stress encounter or like skill challenge or something at the very start of the game to sort of let them feel out exactly what they can do and maybe get a feel for the system. And like that is not the worst idea in the world. Because I feel like, unfortunately, you kind of just gotta like put your nose to the grindstone and just try and get everyone on board, and eventually, hopefully, everyone will figure that out, And this is actually something I've always encountered with RPGs in general, is no matter what, you're always going to have a point where, like, someone misread a rule, or misremembers a rule, or didn't really understand it when it was explained the first couple times, then maybe, like, no one corrected them, so they've had this idea of what it is going forward. That was me with 3.5 forever, I remember. And, like, that's the system I'm most comfortable with, but for the longest time I was running it the wrong way, because no one ever corrected me on it, and the rule book wasn't very clear. Like, I'm sure some of the people here at the table have read the 3.5 core book. It's not exactly, I mean, it's better than like 2E or something, but
yeah,
it's not really, clear cut. It's kind of clunky. I feel like, unfortunately, no matter what, you're always going to have a circumstance where someone's going to be like, okay, so does that let me hit, or like what,
And that also goes into, like, with 3.5, when I've been running for a while, like, because it can be vague in some rulings, like, I'll ask my players, like, say we've been doing something wrong for a year, like, that's our established canon. I'm like, alright guys, from going forward, like, or even the beginning, like, for Edge of the Empire, my friend was like, hey, I want to do this. I'm like, okay, it's kind of like the whole, meat beats rule, like, hey, if we match ACs, is it in favor of attack or defender? That's one of those things, like, we decide in a lot of our games just to make it fun for the players. Like, hey, this is something we'll establish, but we will not change. Like, we can make our own rules for our own canon, but make sure that is established right when it happens. Like, when we catch that, like, mistake, like, alright guys, we've been doing this the whole time. We're gonna keep doing this, but going forward, we can change it in a new game. This is how we've been playing it. And, like, to answer your question for the nitty-gritty stuff, and, like, with Edge of the Empire, because it is a very self-explanatory system, but it has a unique dice pool because it made its own. The way he described it to players like that, like say an interesting thing came up, I'm like, alright guys, let's make the system our own, because again, I like to be lenient and I like to do kind of cool rules, and I try to really engage people the best I can outside of just normal fighting. Like, my friend is really good at that, like where he has a blade that has wind abilities in 3.5. And in the actual mechanic is just, you hit somebody, it does extra, specifically, I want to say it's just gale damage, like gale force. And I was like, that's cool. Like, but he extrapolated, like, okay, I can shoot wind out of this. Like, can I use it to manipulate objects, move things, if I attack hard enough? And we thought, why not? That's cool. Like, we changed the mechanics. So, the way I try to have players get outside of just, I hit it in the face, does it bleed? Is I try to really describe the environment and describe their characters, saying like, okay, so you see there's like 2 pedestals behind you, egg on one, an eye on the other. The enemy's in between there's chandeliers above them. What do you do? And I try to give them as much.
Egon from Ghostbusters is behind one of them. Is that what you said? Okay.
So Egon's there, and Egon's on a pedestal saying, help me please. Be like, I ignore him. But, no, I try to make sure they interact with the environment as much as they do with the enemy, because that makes it so much more fun for planning moves. Like, my friend, for instance, multiple times uses Gale Force to knock an object off, to, like, hit somebody. Somebody's throwing things at the ceiling to, like, have rocks fall on them, like, outside just the normal attacks. And because I've promoted that whole, like, we can try to make things fun GM thing, we bend the rules, but make sure to establish canon from the beginning.
Okay. What do you do if, as a game master, you feel like the players, they have kind of gotten into the mindset of just, I roll to a hit. Did I hit? Okay, roll damage. I've tried throwing at them an enemy who can't either, they're, like, in D&D, their armor class is so high that they can only hit on an incredibly high roll, like a 17, 18, or 19, or 20. And it's 3 rounds into combat. Nobody has hit them yet, but there are all these other things that they can do to kind of, they can boost, like, they can do things to boost up their attacks. They can do things to debilitate the enemy. but the players aren't doing that, and you've described the scenario, but they're continuing to just, well, my main stat is strength, so I'm continuing to try to hit. And at what point do you, for seasoned players, what point do you say, okay, you guys need to kind of think outside the box on this one?
I actually tried to do the Bob Ross thing where it's a happy accident. I've actually had to do this before, where somebody misses, but they whiff in a way that I want them to. Like let's say they're attacking hard, like going for this thing's throat, like going for Egon, let's say, going to fight him, misses, hits the egg. I'm like, all right, you're nat 1. You hit this egg and it bursts. Like a toxic cloud comes out and starts hurting everyone in the room, including the creature itself. Like I have something like convenient happen, like, oh, I can do that. So I try to make it make sense in the story instead of like bumping into them. So that's how I try to do it if it can work. And it's like you said, if it's like 3 rounds, nothing's happened, then I not force their hand, but have a GM intrusion. Like, this is something you can do, but make it look like they did it.
I think to that encounter we had relatively recently in Avena that's now concluded, but where there were the ghost soldiers, and I was playing a character that had a blade that nullified magic. And despite that, I still, and like, they could also hurt spirits in like ethereal forms, and I couldn't slice through them. And my thinking in that scenario, because that was, at least I think so, you were intending for that to be a, like, think outside the box combat.
Yeah.
Was like, okay, well, I'm clearly, I'm still a strength character. How else can I use my strength besides just like walking up and trying to hack and slash them? I'm like, so how else can I still use my core strongest attribute, but, in a different way? So I had you describe the enemies to me again. And I'm like, okay, well, they all got these swords. No, and my mind's always like okay, I'm going to do this. If that doesn't work, I'm going to do this. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to do this. And so I kind of lucked out in there. And then my second thing was, okay, well, I'm going to start hitting the swords. And that worked. So I kind of feel like that's the approach players at least need to have when they come up with these scenarios. They still need to, like, keep in mind their core thing. Because, like, yes, if you're a barbarian character with great strength, you're not going to have high int. So you don't want to have it like, oh, you need to beat them in a chess game or something. That's because you're not going to be able to do that. But I think you need to try to think a little creatively and figure out how you can use your base strong attribute to, like, overcome the challenge.
Something that's always worked for me, for GMs pointing out that, man, that's really not working. If it has been like 2 or 3 rounds of combat, it's just like, man, a GM was pointing out, man, it doesn't seem to be working. Like, maybe there's something else that we can do or try, because obviously nothing is happening. Like, heavy sarcasm on their part. It really was just like, man, I'm trying to think as hard as I can, and just trying anything possible at that point, because we're dying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, make it obvious that this isn't working, risk their lives, and then they'll start doing something different instead of just trying to use brute strength. Give it, like, a negative impact, and hopefully that'll cause a positive correlation to their thinking.
I think if you don't want to be a sarcastic DM, you have players that might not take that well. It's a group you don't know very well. There could be any number of reasons. Because, yeah, obviously you could just come out and say, yeah, you guys are really doing great at this, aren't you? But,
nailing it.
Keep swinging that sword. Doing a lot for you.
Eventually it'll either kill you or them, right?
That's when you, take something on the table and say, oh, I'll swing my sword, and then you stab the GM in the eye.
Oh!
There it is.
No, we don't condone that here. What I was going to say is that what you could do as a GM is suggest it in a more subtle way by asking for a different type of role. Essentially, pull alright, which of my players and their characters here is more likely to notice it? Well, I know that this Eldritch Knight has dabbled in magic, but they keep swinging that sword because that's still their best stat. Alright, hey, player with the Eldritch Knight, it's your turn now. Do me a favor, give me an arcane knowledge roll real quick. And they do. And if they fail it, you could just say, well, you notice nothing. But that's going to get the players thinking. They're going to be like, what the hell was he trying to get them to notice? And if they succeed their roll, obviously you could be like, he's got a magic shield, you gotta fucking disenchant it, you piece of that's some trash.
The burp's necessary.
Yeah, because at this point you're so frustrated that you're just drinking. Yeah, ask for a roll, whatever happens, the outcome there, the players are going to realize, oh, the DM just had me do a roll that isn't a fucking roll to hit. Huh, maybe there's something else about this boss.
That's a good point. Like, something I do to try to promote that with players, like, usually, like, core 3.5, you're doing a skill check, it takes your standard action. But I'm like, how about this, guys? I'm gonna give you a free skill check here. And I'm like, yeah, like, roll a search, a spot, or, like, just listen, like, anything, or an arcane knowledge check. And they're like, yeah, oh my gosh, it's a beholder we're fighting. That's no rabbit. And they're like, right, you solved the illusion. So, yeah, I'll do that sometimes. You're right, if I need to, like, promote them. And that's one of the safer ways that's happened. Because usually my players, like, after a while we'll figure it out, but it's always good to help push along the best you can if they're struggling for a couple rounds. Because like you're saying, Nina, I don't want them just dying, having a bad time.
I know that in a particular situation, one of our enemies couldn't be hit by magic, which we're just magic people, so we're all wizards of some sort. We're just like, God, why won't he get? And he's just like, nope, there goes the damage. And I'm just like, God damn it, I'm so frustrated. And I just went up and punched him in the face, and they're just like, oh, why'd you do that? That was mean. And I'm just like, well, there we go. And
everyone was just like,
seriously?
Really, that's all we had to do?
Sometimes it's fun for, like, a storytelling point, though, like, where you actually have something so simple that players wouldn't think of. Like, I know I've had to adapt to a large player base. Like, I have a lot of people in my 3-5 games, so I have to make an enemy that can take on many of their strengths, which is hard. And that's one thing they have to realize, who has the best advantage on this. But on the flip side, like you guys were saying, a fun mechanic where the players are so ingrained with hacking and slashing, just shooting magic missiles, like, not really thinking outside the box. Like, you need something like that to really just engage them again. And kind of, like you were saying after, like, session 3, like, making sure they have fun. Like, not just going in just for a dungeon crawl, really.
Trying out all the abilities that they genned in the beginning of character creation, instead of just using the same 3 that you know might work.
Yeah, it, like, breaks out the archetype into a character, which is cool. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Quite a bit ago, brought up about, like, new players and, like, how their shyness can kind of impact the way that they are introduced into the game, the way that a new player being less inclined to participate, either because they're just not comfortable with the rules, or maybe it's just a personality trait that they are a quiet and shy person. What are some ways that you guys can think of to kind of either coax them out of that, or find ways to overcome that?
In both of my new games, I've had, like, new players that are kind of, like, shy. And the first one just need to find his voice. Like, he just never done role-playing before, so that doesn't matter. He's the one who has the Sonic Blade I mentioned, the one who thinks outside of the box, because I knew as a person he loves solving problems in, like, outside, like, just, like, unique ways. Like, say there's a wall and you need to break it, he's the one who's going to try to dig under it, find the structural instabilities, and break it. So it sounds more complicated, but that's more fun for him, because he loves stuff like that. So I just throw scenarios at him like that, and really dig into his backstory. Like, everyone else was invested at their own level in the game. Like, at that point, new or old player, they found the thing they hooked onto and really liked, and he was still struggling. So I didn't make him the main character, but I gave him a really big center point in the plot, so that he had to be in the spotlight for everything, and he loved it. Like, he was like, oh, my character has importance, I impact the world, this is big for me, and it was actually really, like, it resounded with him, and he still loves that. So sometimes you just gotta see what that player needs, and what he needed was what he felt a big role. So I gave it to him. And that worked out. And another flip side, like, there's another new player I have. She's just shy as a person, like, not a shy player, but not a shy character, a shy player. And for her, I'm just trying to, like, she loves backstory, that's her thing. So I'm just trying to engage her backstory as much as possible, and just in the game, like I mentioned, calling her, like, hey, what do you think? Like, what would your character do here? And she wants to play, so she'll then say what she wants to do, articulate that, but that's just a matter of me engaging with her, because she waits for me and other characters coming to her. She doesn't actively go out and engage things herself yet. So
I really like for new or shy players to sit close to the game master, because then whenever they say something, it can be heard by the game master. And then the game master, if like they're strategizing or something, the game master can capitalize on if they throw in a suggestion, and make sure that if it's something that has any logical sense to working, they can throw it in and say, yeah, that's actually what's going on. And it rewards the player for actually coming forth with a good idea. And it gets the other players to realize, hey, this person figured out what was going on. They have good ideas. We should listen to them in the future.
I know something that has helped other players that I was in games with in the past, and with me, I think once or twice, was the GM picking out an NPC to kind of like attach to that character. That way that you can engage them in conversation, engage them in what's going on, and if they're struggling, the NPC can easily help them out or something along those lines. Not specifically assign them an NPC, but have that character attached to them. And I always found that to be at least one way of, like, forcing them to have a connection to the world and helping the engaging concept.
Mm-hmm. And it also, that NPC could be not necessarily a guide, but it might also be a responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Kid NPCs are great for, like, just giving to a new player and saying, this kid is your responsibility. Like, you met this street urchin, and this street urchin kid tried to rob you, but now is attached at the hip, and so you've got this responsibility now of taking care of them. How are you going to do it? And having that NPC then kind of get into trouble, sparks that person to, well, now I have to act because that is part of my responsibility. But with that, the player character has to be on board with it as well.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that would capture both the Ninas.
I know, I was like, I would love to consistently in every single game I play to have a street urchin child just be like, you're my parent now. Like, of course I can do that.
There's actually, in the campaign that I'm in now, it has actually happened to our currently shyest and newest player. We rescued a child and they just attached to their hip, and it's helped them at least a little bit so far to kind of be like, it's okay, I'll take care of you.
Yeah, and you can build tragedy too. Like, say they get abducted, something happens. Like, I'm just saying.
New plot.
It helps with the plots. That's a good idea.
I think as a shy character, one of the pitfalls I fall into is attaching myself to another PC and becoming their sidekick. And I know that's a thing that we brought up before in a past podcast, but like, oh god, I have no idea how not to do that.
Try attaching yourself to an NPC and see how that works.
Well, see, but the problem with that is that I'll become an NPC's sidekick, and that's even worse.
I think that's a interesting thing to bring up, is PCs becoming sort of sidekicks to other PCs, because I'm not necessarily someone that is on the inverse of that spectrum, but I know that I'm the one that tends to, like, attract PC sidekicks.
Look, Bud, it's you or Kyle. It's pretty consistent for me, it's you or Kyle.
In other games, too, it's just sort of, I don't know if sometimes it's just the characters that people play, and maybe, like, that another character is looking for, like, a father figure, or, like, something. But, you know, I don't know, or like, needs a friend, and you're the only person, for whatever reason, that is, like, willing to accept them for, like, crimes they committed or something. That's just an example. Or, and then this is, you know, something that I think goes a little bit deeper. I also think it's, like, personalities at the table. If you have someone that's talking a lot, you know, and now, this is not necessarily the case with you, Nina, because you talk quite a bit. In some games, it's less than others, but I think that, like, sometimes, you know, there may be a personality at the table, and if a player's newer, or maybe they're not as confident in their roleplay ability, they're gonna stick to someone who's, like, I mean, I run around games like a chicken with his head cut off. Like, I'm doing stuff all the fucking time. I'm always talking, and so I think that unfortunately, people maybe that aren't as confident or are new and are trying to, like, get into it will, like, attach themselves to that because they say, oh, wow, he's doing things. Like, he may not be doing them well, but he's doing things.
Wow, look at that man go!
He's all the way over there now! So, I don't know. I think that's a dynamic.
But what I was saying was that if you attach to an NPC, the GM can use that as your crutch, and or instead of becoming their sidekick, you can reel them back and be like, no, this is for you. Gentle pushes, but you still have that to fall back on if, like, there's something that you can or can't do. And it's a good, like, practice for being more of a screw these other PCs kind of character.
I will say this, though, and that is because you bring a good point. I think that's a good strategy, Nina. If the game you're in has a GM that is the type to make a very obvious insert character, do not attach yourself to them, because you will rapidly find yourself becoming their sidekick. And that's, you know, because it's their insert character. And that's, you know, they're going to put all of their, like, desire to roleplay with people into that character, and their desire to do things into that character. Attach yourself to someone maybe not as important in the GM's eyes, and then they'll be able to let you, you know, not be a sidekick.
It's fun for the GM, too, because they get to, like, explore a character they may not have thought of, like, diving into. Yeah. And that can be a cool dynamic between you and the player.
Well, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Woo! Yeah!
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.